Wie bitte, Volker? Die wandelt da was. Okay.
Well, I only take 6 hours to sell.
All right. And oh, that's tomorrow. Catch Kucha. There's beer for Catch Kucha. Not a bar. I got beer, but $400 buys a lot of Thai beer. There's 150. No, I bought the Secretary arrangement. I pay them. They pay the hotel. Yeah, Montreal, I got 70 beers for $400. And then wherever we did it before, I just got a bartender for $400 and no beer at all. So the free beer thing is definitely better with it. Hey, Sean. Okay. Are you 100%?
70.
A little under the weather.
I said, get out. I could get out of bed in the morning when I was in the session. Good session, so. Good.
It's like, well, senior contagious and she's kind of scooting around. I'm along with you. I am. One of my ears is completely stopped. I can't hear the interviews here. So cleaning it. I made it a lot worse. It's like they say, don't use computers.
My one is not continuous because this fever I'm having is stomach pain.
Oh, so there's food?
It's kind of food poisoning. I had some issue with gastric issue, so it just combined, and then my doctor said like, because I'm not having the usual flu kind of thing with body pain, maybe my fever.
You don't get the flu?
And then my stomach problem with the previous one has been nursing.
Well, between the two of us, there's like enough parts for one working person.
Yes. I think we should be starting this.
Chris, Tommy, is Michael here? Where's Michael?
Where is Michael?
Is Phil here?
I've seen Phil. Michael is there.
Is Philip here? Philip Teasel? Oh, remote. Hi, Philip. Okay, so let's get going. We have a short slot today, so we shouldn't waste any time. We only got 90 minutes, but at least you get Friday off. At least those of you who are here. So my name is Aaron Falk. This is Zarker. I'm going to do the introductory slides and then probably stay largely quiet because I can barely hear. So if you say something to me and I don't respond in a reasonable way, it's probably because I didn't hear what you said. But anyways, so this is the TAPS working group. Oh, Kyle is the Jabber scribe. Mike Bishop is taking minutes. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Michael. Please try to make sure that Mike knows who you are so we can get it down in the notes. Here's the note. Well, this is an IETF activity. Anything you say or put in the Jabber room or put up on the screen should be considered an IETF contribution. Here's today's agenda. So we are going to talk about a bunch of drafts, some interesting API convergence. I'm going to pause for implementation updates. I don't know if we actually have anything to say on that, but maybe folks can get up to the microphone if they're working on implementation. I'll give just a quick update on what's going on. Philip, who's remote, is going to talk about the TAPS registry. Have to decide whether we want one or not, and if so, what it might look like. And then if we have time at the end, a few minutes to talk about our use of GitHub. So some of you should be aware that we had a virtual interim in September, talking about a number of topics from the interface architecture and implementation document. Not going to go through these. You can see the topics here. There was actually quite a bit of activity and major revisions of the drafts as an outcome of that. We haven't published any RFCs since the last meeting. MinSet has passed IETF and IESG review and is now in the RFC editor queue. So thank you, everybody, for your contributions on that. Thank you, Teresa, for being the shepherd. So that's another one of our documents that is basically on the finish line. It's in misref state. I think it's at least waiting for the security document. I don't think it's waiting for the other documents in order to get published. Not that, people have to have the RFC number because they want to cite MinSet, but it'll be good to have them come out as a coherent set of documents. The Transport Security Protocols Survey, Chris is going to talk about that in a second. I clicked the appropriate button on the data tracker to request a Security Directorate early review. I think this is a good time for us to find out if folks in the security area are going to have any serious heartburn with that, so we can try to get those changes in before it moves forward. And sort of the core docs, the real meat of what the group is doing, have all, like I said, been revised substantially. If you haven't read them recently, pick them up, read them. They're really they're nice, worth reading. This is our current set of milestones that are on the data tracker. You'll see that security was supposed to be submitted in July. We didn't do that. MinSet was supposed to be submitted to the ISG by November. We did do that. Other things are happening way off in the distant future, which is sometime in March. So anyways, I'm going to just push everything ahead a little bit. And so we're going to push security out to March. We can claim the MinSet is done, and then push the March documents down to November so that we have a chance to finish them. They're looking, mostly complete, but so I don't think we need to add a whole lot of time. Yes, Gori.
Gori Fairs. I could speak a little bit for Arch. I think it probably is nearly finished. I did a very detailed review and went through it with Tommy, and it's probably going to be finished very soon for people to read and really digest, and probably I suggest we could freeze this almost until we get around to publishing the API, which it has to match.
Do you think we should last call it now, or do you want to wait until all three documents are done before we last call it?
Do you want to do two last calls? Well, okay, because
the first one wouldn't be a last call.
Exactly.
It would be a next to last call.
It cannot be finalized until API.
Okay,
why have I got such an echo?
Yeah. So we should do a working group review of it. I mean, if you think it's settled, we should, encourage people to read it and send comments. And yeah, and I think then just sort of sit on it. Maybe we have to refresh it to keep it alive in the repository. So I think that's a great idea.
I'll let Tommy's editing, but that would be my recommendation. Next rev, not this one.
So
Okay.
Brian is in queue.
Philip agrees. Oh, Brian, did you push a button?
Good morning. Okay, the ghost is jumping back and forth. Is that anyway? Yeah, more or less what Gori said. I would actually say that we should do a sort of a call for review, and we can even milestone it. We can say architecture approved by the working group, because I would like to actually have something, some milestone that actually gets us to read it and say, yes, we are happy with the architecture in and of itself, where the reason to hold it is that we might discover something in the final refinement of the interface and the implementation, and looking at sort of implementation experience might feed back in and say, oh, well, we missed something in the architecture, but like conceptually, I really think it makes sense to have a review of the working group that says, yes, this is the architecture that we want, and I'd like to do that for Prague. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. So it's like 2 last calls, but one is even a milestone, which is working group approval of. I mean, the milestone doesn't necessarily have to be it gets sent up to some other body.
Yeah. So I don't really want to create milestones. Adding milestones to the charter is tedious and doesn't add any value. But I think we should get a working group consensus that the document is done and correct, and we should. And I think that's the real substance of it. Are you all right with that? Yeah.
So let's put that on the. Let's just go ahead and say now that we're going to put that on the agenda for Prague.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So if you even call it a last call, you don't have to do another one if you don't change anything.
Yeah. True. I think that's unlikely, though. We could. Whatever. Let's not bike shed the milestone name. I think we all have agreement on what we want, right? Okay. So I guess test of realism, since I'm not the person who's actually holding the pen on any of these documents, does having the documents ready for last call by November, right, a year from now, does that seem achievable? Okay, Tommy's nodding his head. Any other head nodding? Okay, Michael says yes.
Colin has some comments.
Hi, Colin Perkins. I think having the documents ready for last call within a year is perfectly reasonable. How much implementation and deployment experience we'll have by then is a different question.
Fair enough. And I think that when the time comes, we can ask the question whether we want to sit on the documents a while and let implementations catch up or not.
Mia Kulevind again. So I'm not the main editor of any of those documents, but I was actually hoping that we'd be finished earlier. So do we already know that we need to push the milestone? Are we totally sure about this?
Yeah, so there is a concern that some of the projects that are putting in all the energies for this are running out of money, and so that people may just not be available to show up in November. That's a concern. Gory?
Now I've done architecture, I plan to read API very, very carefully. I mean, implementation will follow. I mean, maybe we're done earlier, perhaps. I think earlier is possible.
Tommy, Brian online.
Is July? I mean, let's be specific, right? Let's talk about a change. Does July seem March? You guys gonna be done 3 months? Okay, Tommy says no for March.
John, Brian.
Yeah. Brian, you're up.
Yeah, I think for interface, March is aggressive, and we've also said that we want to have at least initial implementation experience before we push interface out the door, given how the milestone is phrased, and I think that's correct. I know at least that our initial implementation at ETH will be done in March because that's when the student graduates. So, and he has he starts his job on the 4th of March, so he has to be done by the 1st, I guess, is a Friday. Yeah, I think that if we wanted to stick with the March milestone for interface, we could do it, but it would be aggressive. I think July is easily doable. And I think implementation, yeah, I'll defer to Anna on that one, but that one might take a bit longer, right? So we're actually kind of doing this in order. We're doing the architecture first, then we're doing the interface definition, then we're doing the implementation. So we could actually stagger those out. And they'll all be done. If we all want them to go out at the same time, then yeah, it's probably November. But for interface for itself, July is perfectly doable in my opinion.
Are there any authors from the implementation draft here?
Right.
Tommy,
So,
Mike, you guys want to speak to that?
yeah. So Tommy Pauly. Right. So speaking as editor of architecture and implementation, I think architecture for March is great. I think staggering them such that interface is July is good. And then I do think we should wait until November for implementation. I think we'll have good revs of it by July, but going really deep into how the mappings play out for different protocols, giving guidance on how things like Quick are going in there. Like, we will do a better job of implementation if we have more time for it. And I think we could then essentially dedicate each of the meetings to kind of like the different documents and have a way to like really focus and close on them.
Okay. Mike, did you get that for the notes, those dates? Michael, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, okay. So as a contributor to the implementation draft, I mean, my own experience has been that I've been wanting to contribute stuff and ended up delaying it because we've been changing wordings in the API, and it's annoying to change it. And I say, no, actually, this property is called that, and it's in a different section, and because they point to each other. But much of the implementation stuff I think is known and can be written quite easily, which at least stuff that I think I could write and I haven't written yet. And then there are some things that I think makes sense to delay a bit. But so I agree with the July plan for the API. And I agree with what Tommy said. It would be nice to have a bit more time for implementation, but it's not going to take forever. It's not like we don't know what to do.
So other than Apple, where people presumably will continue to get money, is there anybody else who's going to have any funding between July and November to have any work?
I haven't lost my job, right? And I know how Neat works. I mean, I can describe what we have. It's not
Okay. Well,
there are
people
people
may be
with-
paying you to do something else. I mean, so I'm asking the question. So.
Yeah.
Some of us have as much funding as we had before. Whether that's any, it's a different question.
Okay, I sense that I've tread into a very bad place of the conversation. So let's move on. I think so. The authors, I think we've got a consensus. I haven't heard anybody object to this in the room. So I think let's just move on from that. That is it for my talk. So now Chris is going to talk about. Does this just work? No. Oh. How do you do? Oh, it's control. There we go. No. Yeah, that looks right.
Do you have a clicker thing or?
Yes, there's a clicker. There, okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Wood. So this is just a quick update on the security survey draft, which is basically nearly complete now. The latest changes since draft 2 were basically going through and clarifying some of the feature set, the features that we had added at the beginning glossary, and then we're referencing throughout the document, including in the interface and the mandatory and optional feature section. There was just some sort of inconsistencies between what we defined up front and what was used throughout with respect to terminology. Thank you, Teresa, for pointing that out. We added an early data optional feature now, which is used by many protocol or some protocols. You might have heard of TLS 1.3 being one of them. We added or updated some protocol specific details specifically around Quick and the latest Stream 0 changes. This might end up getting ripped out of the document at the end. One could argue that the internal protocol details are not really relevant for the interfaces that we're describing here, but that's up to, I guess, the sector review and others to tell us whether or not we actually need it. And then there's other editorial cleanup changes that we made just due to our discretion. So there are a couple of outstanding issues that were raised based on Teresa's feedback. The first of which was, as I said, sort of unclear language between in the feature description section, we listed some application dependencies and transport dependencies for some of these features. And more often than not, the transport dependencies are sort of irrelevant, simply because many of the security features that we describe, like authentication of peers, requires an application, it requires some input in the application unless you kind of kick it off to the operating system, for example, to handle that for you. So we ended up just ripping out the transport dependencies altogether and listing only the application dependencies simply because that's made things much more clear. Another issue was whether or not we should touch or elaborate on privacy and privacy considerations of the various protocols. It's my view that this is sort of a rat hole, and that simply acknowledging that there may be privacy sensitive things exposed or exacerbated by particular features that you may or may not enable is a thing, and we don't attempt to survey in this particular document. It could be done elsewhere, but it's not done here. I'm happy to hear other opinions if there are people who violently object to that particular change. And as I said, we have not yet removed the extra protocol details, which I think will likely end up getting ripped out at the end. So next steps, Aaron already said he kicked off the sector review, so thank you. We will hopefully get some feedback from them regarding things like correctness and bugs that may be in the draft, and various general issues around what we consider mandatory and optional features. And assuming that those changes are sort of incorporated, we will then proceed to a working group last call. Yeah, Teresa.
Theresa Enghart. So just for a little context on the comments about application dependency, when I shepherded Minset, we got asked about security all the time, and we say, no, we don't do security in Minset, we do it in the security survey and sort of minimal set of security features to expose to applications. And that's why I read the draft with this mindset of trying to like sort them into optional and mandatory security features, which is in the draft, but then also what do we need to expose to applications in order to be able to make use of those security properties, or can it all just be like only optimizing features in Minset language interface? So in what form is it exposed to the application, or what kinds of knobs does the application have? Now, we don't have to make the security draft like exactly parallel to Minset in that regard, but yeah, I might suggest some text in that regard, if that's okay.
So the intent of the features is to simply just enumerate all the knobs that we desire a TAPS implementation to expose. And I think that the text is sort of clear in that respect. Is there something more specific you're looking for?
Oh, there's the features, and then there's the application dependency. And in my understanding, application dependency means we need input from the application for this to actually work in a useful way. That's how I understood it so far. And
yes.
It's still not really clear to me in 04. And that's why I suggested to sort this out. But yeah, it can also maybe happen in the last call.
Is the need for the dependency sort of unclear, or the actual dependency itself?
The actual dependency, right? Like what form does it have? We have a dependency that the application can verify the identity of the peer, for example. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense, right? And then there's some obvious interface needed from this security implementation to the application. And we have things in the interface draft, but my understanding was that we wanted to have this baseline of the minimum thing that needs to be exposed to the application, so these features actually make sense. And that's what I was getting at.
Okay, I think I'm parsing what you're saying. However, I'm not sure how I would act on and actually make changes. So perhaps we could just talk offline.
Yep.
Yeah, Maria.
Mia Kulevind. I didn't read the latest version, so I'm just asking. So is that basically saying that the min set is empty in this case?
I don't believe so.
Okay, what's in the min set?
The mandatory features are the min set.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, good.
So just to clarify, you don't, there are no content holes, right? Looks like you've got some refinement to do, but basically you think you're mostly done.
With respect to how this kind of ties into the new, the three TAPS are new the interface and architecture draft, yes, I think we're basically complete in that respect. Some of the guts may be reworked or just completely removed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yep. All right, hello everyone. I'm Tommy Pauly, and this is essentially a deviation from our main look at our drafts for the architecture and the API and the implementation to look at some practical use cases about how we take the concepts that we're putting into the API for a generic transport API, and how do those play out in reality when we're trying to deploy new protocols like Quick, or when application use cases like WebRTC are trying to adopt Quick and move to new transport protocols. This is a good exercise for us to make sure that we have the right model, the right architecture, and the right interface. And then hopefully we can also use these mappings to actually create APIs that applications can use to adopt Quick and get new great transport features out of that. So I'm going to start with looking at a draft that we put out. It's actually published just as an individual document into the Quick working group as Quick interface. I think there could be discussion of whether that type of work belongs here or belongs there, but I think we want the expertise of both groups to be able to chime in. So first, what are the goals that we would have for a Quick API as like a transport level Quick API? So the first thing I think that's very important, especially from a TAPS perspective, is that we want to make it very easy for a client to transition to Quick. And that means both in terms of how much they would have to rewrite their code and re-architecture the way that they interact with their transport, as well as dynamically, do they have a way to have a piece of code that can dynamically fall back from Quick to something over TLS in the same way that HTTP is set up to do. And so what we want to define is what is that common API surface between Quick and then other more TCP style solutions. And the goal of this also then is to be able to expose some novel transport features, being able to support 0RTT, being able to support multi-streaming so that applications can actually take advantage of that. So just to look at this a bit graphically, the model that I think most applications are going to be approaching Quick with is that you have some HTTP application, there's going to be some HTTP API layer that's actually handling what the application's doing, and then within that, there will be some logic that translates into either HTTP2 TLS stack or what we're probably calling HTTP3 over Quick and UDP, and that's kind of all baked into one piece. So that's great for HTTP applications. But then what do we do with the kind of foo protocol that's not necessarily running HTTP? Essentially, we're going to see a pattern of reinventing this wheel if they need to handle two different transports and how they're going to upgrade things. So this is where, of course, we can say, hey, a TAPS API comes in perfectly here. We can describe, yes, you're allowed to use Quick and something else. Here are my parameters for how I want to interact with the transport. And if we can have sufficient equivalence between the two different protocol stacks, we could actually migrate to Quick. But if Quick is blocked on a certain network, it's not going to be a total impairment for the application. And then if we look at this, we can essentially see that the TAPS layer of API can be the implementation detail, the name for how the HTTP implementation does this balancing of the two different transports. So that's just kind of the architectural mindset I'm coming from. So what I want to look at when we actually get into the details of how we do a Quick API for transport, I think there are different ways that applications are going to come to think of Quick as a transport and how they can use it. And so this first one is actually going to be very simple, essentially using a whole Quick connection really just as a replacement for a TCP stream that's encrypted. And you could essentially have a degenerate case here. And there actually are a lot of benefits to an application. They get a secure handshake that's faster than what they can do otherwise. They have 0RTT support that we believe will actually work across the internet. They will have path migration, which you could only otherwise get with MPTCP. You have extensible transport parameters, and you have much more complete privacy and authentication of your transport headers. So even in the case in which we're just kind of comparing a Quick stream to a TCP stream, there are definitely benefits. There's also the model of using the Quick transport as a, oh, do we have a question? Hello.
Hi, Sean Turner. Can you go back one slide? Yeah, there.
Yeah, here we go.
So there are dragons with 0RTT. So is there some way that you're going to like put in the API, like, hey, on the application, I'm picking the go fast button, and then there's the go really fast button with 0RTT?
Right. So at least, and this is something that we're still discussing because there are different models for doing idempotent data.
Yeah.
I think all the models do include a strict requirement that you are marking as an application, this is idempotent, I expect this will be replayed. We're going to be probably erasing that data. So yes, you have to check all of the boxes and sign your life away.
Okay, great.
It's very important. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, Eric Kinnear, just to add to what Tommy said, it's not just that you have to mark it as idempotent, but you actually have to say, I explicitly want this behavior and it's idempotent. So you need both things to happen.
Right. I think the marginal benefit of Quick over TLS 1.3 and TFO is that TFO has some issues and impediments that hopefully Quick will not inherit. Smooth.
Subodhanger, could you go back one slide? So we're just reverting you back to the first slide eventually.
Okay.
With this API, a clarification question, this API, for example, when you were talking about HTTP over Quick and HTTP2 over TLS, and HTTP over QUIC, which is H3 now, they have different semantics of like, you know, the QPAC encoder and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
When you have HTTP over the TAPS API, would the expectation be like there would be some feedback given back to the HTTP layer saying that they have to re-encode their messages? And
Right. So one of the concepts that we have in the TAPS API is the notion, so everything's kind of trying to be message based, and there's the notion of like a framing layer that describes how you actually encode your messages. So ideally you could have like the high level HTTP state machine saying, here are the messages I'm writing and reading. And then you essentially just load, here's my encoder and decoder that I'm going to put on whatever protocol stack comes up, and you load H3 and H2. And H1, right. I mean, you can essentially enumerate the options. We don't want to get too stuck here. Yes, Maria?
Mia Kuhlmann, I would have answered the question a little bit differently because what I see it is that you can also change the two boxes and put HTTP underneath of tabs if you just use it as a pseudo transport, for example, and then the mapping is absolutely clear. Then it's H3 here and H2 or whatever there. But you can also define, and HTTP is a little bit an own thing because H2 includes some transport semantics, which maybe never should have been there, but whatever, that's a different discussion. You can also provide a separate mapping for each version of HTTP to tabs, in theory.
Yeah. So I think one thing maybe just to clarify on this is that specifically the point of saying the HTTP API is that the application is just talking to whatever it's talking to. How we build that beneath can be whatever layering we need.
Yeah, Kyle Rose. I mean, I would say that the diagram is not quite to scale, right? That there will be some changes made. Yes. Yeah, so I mean, you might even say something, replace HTTP API, which I think comes loaded with some baggage about the wire image, and maybe, you know, I mean, I don't know, REST API or something like that. So.
Yep, fair. Great. So anyway, getting back to the models of how we use it, there's the basic degenerate TCP style stream. There's using QUIC as a message channel. I think this is how I'm referring to how HTTP 3 is going to be using QUIC. You're consuming a stream for each application message. And so you're benefiting from all the things we mentioned before, but you have this added benefit of removing head of line blocking between your messages that you would have otherwise had. And now you have these explicit unidirectional and bidirectional stream semantics, which if you think of these as messages, that essentially just turns into replyable and non-replyable messages getting baked into your transport. And then the last model I summarized is essentially treating the QUIC connection as a tunnel for several streams and thinking of streams as more long-lived big things. These could be independent file transfers and things, or even VPN flows that are going next to each other. And the benefit here is that you have this shared security and authentication context and kind of overall connection lifetime fate sharing. Yes, Ted.
Ted Hardy. Would you mind going back to the slide that showed the not HTTP application for a second? Thanks. So this is actually, when I saw this, I was like, ooh, let's put DNS up there. Because I think there are cases where running the DNS on top of QUIC will turn out to be giving you privacy considerations similar to DTLS or TLS, but with all of the other advantages you just mentioned. However, because of the fact that DNS already has this, am I running it over UDP? Am I running it over TCP? And now DTLS or TLS in addition to this gets a little bit more complicated when we get to your models question. Because when you're talking to the API, you need to know what of the available transports are in order to figure out what model you as a DNS client send down to it. That is, can I count on the transport underneath me handling the head of line blocking as it would if it was sending request responses on individual streams, which was, I guess, your option 3. Right. Or do I have to treat it as if it's a single stream response thing where I then need to exercise the API multiple times in order to get the behavior equivalent of what I would get with UDP. So I think from an API perspective, for the systems which already have multiple different transport layer protocols and where they are inheriting some of the limitations of those transport protocols, you may need a little bit more complexity in the API to allow the application to know which set of these models is available below it.
Or to essentially have intermediary layers above some of the other protocols to do the translation of the kind of the API contract of what happens to that data.
Okay, if you want to segment it out like that, I still think you need the
Yes.
functionality, whether
Yes.
it's in the API
Absolutely.
or in one of these shims.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Eric Kinnear, just to kind of address a little bit of that, I think one of the things that's come up that I'm not sure is totally expressed by this diagram is either you need to communicate the information out the top of the API that the application needs to know in order to do the right thing, whether in this example it's going over TLS, TCP, or going over QUIC and UDP, but extend to DTLS and UDP and everything else, right? Especially for the DNS example. Or you need to define a common abstraction layer like a DNS message that would be sent into the TAPS API, which you would then, like Tommy just mentioned, load something in on top of QUIC in this picture and on top of TLS in this picture that would know how to translate that generic message that doesn't care what's underneath into the right thing for each one.
Which is essentially the model that HTTP often ends up having, because
Precisely.
the application at the top can think of it just as HTTP.
Precisely.
All right. I would like to get through the rest of this at some point, but.
So can I just suggest maybe that you and Greg and I sit down and talk a little bit about the DNS case offline then?
That would be great.
Thanks.
Yes, please, let's do that. All right, so these are the various models for using QUIC. Out of that, the document essentially describes two high-level ways that we can actually map the TAPS pieces of functionality onto QUIC connections, depending on which model your application is thinking of things in. So this is an interesting little conundrum. If you think of your TAPS level connection, the thing that used to be your TCP stream, as a QUIC stream, I think it essentially maps like this. If you call initiate on your connection, it implicitly opens up a QUIC connection and does a handshake if it needs to, or just joins an existing one, opens up a new stream on that, or allocates just a new stream. When you send and receive data, that all maps pretty clearly. If you close your stream, that's essentially resetting the stream and probably setting a stop sending as well. The matter of like actually cleaning up underlying connections may be deferred, especially if you're reusing these and using connection groups. The other possible mapping is to treat your entire QUIC connection as a transport connection. When you initiate it, all it does is do a quick handshake. When you send a message, that implicitly opens up a new stream, and then the message completing closes that stream. And you can essentially receive a reply to that as the bidirectional part of the stream. And then when you close your connection, it closes the QUIC connection. So these are just two different models of how we can do it. Both of them are described in the document. The latter can sometimes fit better if you're thinking of things more like HTTP. The former is more flexible. So when we go through just the considerations here, I think a couple things we want to point out, even if you could possibly expose both, I think we want, as far as like the implementation documents, we want one way of actually handling how TAPS maps down into QUIC. The stream mode, if we look at it, I believe has more complete expressivity, which would lead to saying that you should probably, if you have like this message type mode, it would be something that you just build on top of a stream, a fully stream controlled mode. The one caveat that comes up by looking at the diagram and how we do the mapping is that in the stream mode, we kind of have this implicit opening of the first stream, which kind of makes the layering a little bit odd. And we actually want to get into kind of the WebRTC mappings that will come up as one of the concerns. Anyway, so that's generally that document. It'd be good to have feedback from QUIC folks and other people about which way we think applications will actually want to interact with QUIC as a transport.
Go ahead, Phil.
Hello. So about your second API idea with the message-based API, going back to what we did with our socket intense work and the scheduling there, I think putting both under tabs might be an option if we introduce something like a connection pool that also offers the features over multiple HTTP connections, over HTTP2, given the appropriate framers. So I think this could be a way to have both without compromising.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah, Mia Kuleman, on your previous slide, you always have to go one back. No, the one before this one, yeah. Why do you have to implicitly open the new stream on Engineer or not on send?
So if you look at how we currently diagram doing multi-streaming, you're adding a new stream is kind of cloning a connection off. So the act of cloning a connection doesn't need to do a new handshake, but it essentially just allocates a new stream. And like in Quick, that's not actually doing anything on the wire, right? It's just like reserving a number for you. But that means implicitly, if you open a first connection that's not a clone of something, you're doing both operations at once.
So, okay, but clone could also do just nothing, right? That would be the alternative. Like clone could do, in a Quick case, it could just do nothing, and then when you send on the clone, you open the stream.
Sure.
And for the TCP case, if you do a clone, it actually opens a new connection.
Yes. I think allocating the new stream is equivalent to saying the first operation that involves data transfer allocates the new stream. Yeah. Great. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next one. Is that, I think, in a different PDF. So this is looking at one of the foo over Quick models, specifically using WebRTC proposals over Quick as an example. So for background, using WebRTC over Quick, that was a proposal that we noticed and was sent out to the TAPS list, and it inspired some discussion around how do we apply transport independent APIs like TAPS to use cases like WebRTC. Included here a link so you can see one of the document proposals for this of how WebRTC would have a Quick specific API. So WebRTC has other low-level transport APIs that also are quite specific about what it exposes. It has a SCTP transport, a DTLS transport, ICE transport. So it seems to be very kind of raw in what it exposes. And so it's adding a Quick transport. That's one of the proposals here. So when we went through this, there were just a couple questions that were raised for me. And so I wanted to pose these to the group and see if there's any feedback or interest here. So the first one, when we're looking at stuff like WebRTC, this is actually something that could potentially use our rendezvous mechanisms, which is something that I don't think a lot of our implementations have fully explored yet. So we want to see, is that sufficiently specified? Another thing that came up is there are a lot of different states and state transitions between how TAPS does things and other transports do things, and do these actually map up and correspond to one another? Then do we have any gaps in our API in TAPS? And are the data models for what WebRTC wants to do compatible with what we're trying to offer with a TAPS type model? So first, when we look at rendezvous, the steps that we have for rendezvousing currently in the TAPS document are you have a pre-connection that you do a resolve upon, you get an array of pre-connections back, which seems to be equivalent to the resolving candidates RTC ICE transport phase. And then you have to establish your various connections. And this is done in TAPS as doing the rendezvous on the pre-connection, which then gives you an event of rendezvous done and delivers you that connection. So this is one of the areas when we're talking about multi-streaming that at least it seemed to me that there was a bit of a weird gap, because when you get delivered that rendezvoused connection, if you're treating connections as streams of a multi-stream transport, essentially, is that stream already established or up for you? Like, what is kind of the state of that underneath? Anyway, Colin.
Colin Perkins. So I think you're missing at least one step, which is that after you have resolved the pre-connection to get a set of candidates, you need to pass that to the far end via the signaling channel. And then that set from the peer is fed into the later rendezvous call.
Got it.
And I think once you add that in, this makes a lot more sense.
Okay.
What I think we haven't well specified is what set of candidates are returned by the resolve operation, and whether we need a rendezvous specific resolve. Because certainly the WebRTC folks ran into the issue where some candidates shouldn't be returned because of privacy reasons. Whereas if you're resolving a pre-connection, for other reasons, you may want to see those candidates. So we need to specify when you get the various candidates and which ones are resolved in which case.
Okay.
Niels Ohlmeyer, agreeing with the previous comment, I think it's not resolve candidates, it's candidate pairs, what you're actually talking about, which comes basically after you exchange the candidates with the other side, and then you only know what are you going to be potential connections.
Right, and the pre-connection object here includes this fully specified pair. Right. No? I would assume.
Which pre-connection object?
The ones that we're returning out of the resolve.
That will give you a set of local endpoints which you can to which the peer can connect.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Some of which may be server reflexive candidates, like ICE, it's derived from ICE and stun and so on. Turn, for example. Yeah, which is why I think resolve is perhaps not necessarily the right thing, because resolve kind of implies things like DNS lookups, whereas this what we want this to do is also do things like the stun exchanges and the turn things and all of that.
Okay. So I think this would be a good thing to dig in on the documents just to make sure it's clear for that.
Yeah, something we very much need to dig into.
Yes. Okay. Good.
Colin Jennings. One other thing that might complicate this a little bit when we're thinking about it is in the web, we often want to be able to do things when we're trying to resolve and we're in the process of finding the best connection. We still want to use one of the connections early and be able to start sending over data over something that did work, even though we haven't fully done what I think you're thinking is a resolution step here. So there's sort of this weird timing thing in that we don't want to lockstep stuff in certain ways. So that would be one of my questions as we work into this more is, hey, does that all work right?
Okay, that's a great point. Thank you. Great. So I think that's definitely perfect. Great. So just a couple other observations we made looking through this. So I was just kind of comparing the various states that we have. One of the things I noticed interestingly is that we have the tap states, which are all of these establishing, established, closing, closed, and there's a closed with error. It doesn't quite line up to the events that we deliver for states of ready, closed, and connection error, so we may want to reconcile that. And then we look at what the WebRTC mappings have. Most of their objects have states for connecting, connected, closed, and failed. There generally isn't something like closing mapped over into that. So I think we just want to make sure that we're a little bit more consistent within our own document here. As far as API gaps, one of the things that the WebRTC quick proposal has explicitly is an abort reading call that can be done. And so this is mapping onto the just sending a stop sending frame within quick. And so this is something that currently our tap surface does not directly let you expose. I think in some cases, when you've fully close the stream, you want to implicitly both reset the stream as well as say stop sending to close both sides of it, and that works perfectly fine. But if we do need to support use cases that are just shutting down explicitly the read side of the connection, we would need to add that. That's an interesting case because it doesn't actually map into essentially any of the protocols that we have. Corey?
Was the last thing a question on your side?
This,
yeah, I have that question.
I don't.
So I've been asking around to various people. So I think, as far as I can tell, from the client side of Quick, you pretty much only would ever do the reset stream and stop sending at the same time if you're going to do stop sending. Although I've heard that you could, essentially on the server side, want to just do a stop sending to indicate that you have received everything you need in order to give your response. But if you're generating a request, closing the side to read the response doesn't make a lot of sense.
Mike Bishop, the other case to consider is when you're the recipient of a unidirectional stream.
Mm-hmm.
This basically says, I've seen enough of the stream to know I don't care about the rest.
Right. Now,
and you can't reset stream that because you only reset stream on the right direction.
Right. So when we think of how this maps into like a transport API, though, if we have a stream, we just say close the stream. I would assume that the mapping, if it knew there was a unidirectional stream in the inbound direction, would just send stop sending. The question is, do you need the distinction to a transport API, essentially on a bidirectional stream, to just do that, read closed? And then the last little bit, I'll just quickly jump through this. Looking at the data transfer mappings, they actually end up being pretty similar. The WebRTC proposals have a lot more introspection into the state, a little bit more socket style, looking at how much data has been buffered currently. But they actually, both for writing and reading, have the same concepts of amount of data and whether or not the data is finished, which maps very well onto what TAPS has for its complete and partial messages. All right.
May I quickly add a comment about the previous question that you just? Yeah, I think so. To me, that may depend on the mapping. You presented these two possible mappings onto streams. I'm not 100% sure about the first case, but the case where you really have a connection being the same as one stream, I think that's equivalent to just aborting the connection in the API. So,
but if you were just doing stop sending, it would actually still, it could possibly let you continue to write on this connection. That's the distinction. Do you need to be able to say,
okay,
I will reject everything you ever send to me, but I'm going to continue to write to you? That's something that we don't currently express.
Right, we don't currently do that. Yeah,
I mean,
what about the
you're about out of
usefulness
time
of
for
that?
this section. If
Yeah.
you want to talk about the W3C API,
Yeah,
I can give you a couple minutes, but
sure,
that was part of your slide.
Okay, I'll let you go on. So
Yeah, that's fine. We do have another slide deck that is posted from the W3C folks of their analysis of looking at the TAPS API, I think just from looking at the document and trying to see how it would work into their model. Maybe we can just toss up one of the slides very briefly, because I think it's interesting to see how kind of fresh eyes from the outside looks at this. So essentially, here's a kind of complete model of all the things that we had exposed in TAPS, trying to write that out into the same language format that the WebRTC layer uses, and essentially it goes through and tries to distill out the various bits that seemed unnecessary for this use case, and then comparing it to what the existing Quick API proposal had, and showing that they're essentially pretty equivalent. So these are up there, I think, as authors and people who are working on the TAPS API. I think we should go through and kind of look at this and treat it as kind of feedback of how this plays out in the real world. I think that's good. Are there any other questions?
Ted Hardy, I absolutely think it's great to go through this and see if you can make TAPS do this as a thought exercise. But I will point out that the work that's been going on in the W3C over the quick transport for WebRTC has run considerably ahead of the work in the IETF's completion of some of the core concepts that they actually need, like partial reliability.
Indeed.
So I strongly suspect that once we get into resolution phase between the API they have created and the protocols that we were actually going to give them to work with. There are going to be changes.
Absolutely.
And speaking perfectly frankly, I kind of hate the current proposal with the fire of 1,000 suns.
Yep.
So I don't wish to make that anything other than my personal prejudice, but you can assume that there probably will be some other people who will suggest pretty serious changes to the protocol stack when they are considering more than just quick using these facilities. Sorry, more than just WebRTC using these facilities.
Right. Exactly.
So I think it's a great idea to do as an example.
Yes.
But I just want to signal to the rest of the people in the room who may not be quite so versed in the state of WebRTC politics that there might be a substantial revision.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. I think at this point, this is
Ted,
treated as a
don't run off, Ted.
academic exercise for us to learn from this mapping of how we should improve TAPS and hopefully give some models back.
Continue, isn't it? Spencer Dawkins, responsible area for area director for transport on Quick. We have a pretty good liaison relationship with W3C, the last I heard, although I don't know any details. But I don't know who that is until
This is a red dot question then.
okay, excellent. Yes, I understand. I understand this. This might be confusing. Is there anything that we need to be talking to them about? And the only model that I really know about on this is RTC Web and WebRTC.
Ted Hardy, as IEB person, I will tell you that the current liaison from the IETF to the W3C is Martin Thompson. The current liaison from the W3C to the IETF is Wendy Seltzer. Martin is certainly very familiar with the RTC Web state. I don't think he's very happy about it, but we're talking familiarity here. I don't think he's missing that. And of course, Harold Elvestrand is one of the working group chairs on the W3C side, and he was in this room until we mentioned the W3C until he fled a few minutes ago. I don't know. Possibly had a phone call to make. So I think that there is informal coordination going on now, but I would not say that the current state is one that I would call well coordinated.
I'd like to move on. I'm not sure this is good use of group time.
Thank you.
Not to say that it's not an issue.
Jetzt similar to the previous discussion. The whole concept of putting an IETF standard on top of an API which was designed for browsers specifically seems rather odd to me. I mean, you basically inherit like lots of problems which you could avoid by just using the protocols directly. I mean, there are like basically implementations of WebRTC which don't care about the W3C APIs. Just as a thought.
Yeah, I think this should be used as TAP should be used in this context as an example of how to design the correct set of transport features as an interface that we can have designed in a transport independent way. So it's more of a guidance for how APIs can be done in that regard.
If I recall the history correctly, so Tommy popped up and said, hey, we've been looking at an API to do WebRTC over TAPS. And somebody said, oh, I think there already is one of those coming out of W3C. So we contacted them, sent them an email, and they're like, oh, what are you guys doing? And then they tried to mash them together, which is the result is what you see on the screen. So this is not the product of a lot of engineering, but I think this is actually kind of an outreach that they now know what we're doing. And I think we know something about what they're doing.
Colin Jennings with my hat is on, one of the RTC Web document authors and somewhat responsible for a little bit of not the Quick API, but the API it was based off of, which was an awful design based off trying to be compatible with a previous awful design. And when you understand the motivation for why whatever happened at W3C, which I more or less agree with you is not worth time here, you will hate this as much as Ted. So don't take this as a design that you really need to love or do anything. I mean, great, it's an example of what some people are doing, but don't be over-rotated on it.
I agree with the idea there that the quick WFC API needs to find a sweet spot between being low and high, and it's currently under discussion. And clearly, the work of tabs might help a lot in defining the right level there. Currently, I don't think it's the right level, but it can certainly evolve to something that would be good. Thank you.
All right, okay. Let's move on. Michael.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So this is a 20-minute slot, and I have questions worth of more time. I guess you should just stop me when the time comes. We should just use the slot to discuss as long as we can, and when we run out of time, stop discussing and take it to the list. And I think the sequence of things here also is okay. So, if we manage to go with the first 1-2 things and get them solved, good. All right. So to begin with, first of all, we have a number of connection and message properties that are to be discussed, not yet completely agreed. So there is an appendix that contains experimental transfer properties. I think it makes sense for the appendix to eventually have a list of some that we consider final as experimental, as optional to implement. Right now, there is text saying these are not part of the interface. They may be removed. They're presented here to support discussion, which is what we're having here. So the question is, what do people think about those? Which ones do we keep? There is direction of communication, which doesn't map to anything from any of the protocols that were analyzed in MinSet, but I believe it maps to Quick. And it just adds something on top of what we have. I believe there are good reasons to keep it, but if anybody says that that is something that should go out or should be discussed further, then yes, that's the point here.
It would also map to our CP.
Right, all right. Yeah, points in favor are good. I mean, I'd be happy to keep this. I think several of us are. So I'm starting with the easy one, right? Yes?
Yeah, direction of Theresa Enghardt, direction of communication is mentioned a lot in the maintaining connections section of the draft. So I was actually surprised to not see it somewhere up there in like the body of the text, and I would suggest we keep it. And then if I may come to another one, if that's okay, I would suggest we move cost preferences to the, I'm not sure, path selection probably. I'm not sure if it's really at that granularity or if we just want Boolean, like is additional cost okay or not, perhaps, but that would at least be my suggestion.
I'm not sure I follow you on the hop from direction of communication to cost preference. So that's an unrelated separate thing you're bringing up. So let's do this in sequence, I think. Let's see if we can get agreement on the direction of communication staying and moving it to the main text. Do we have agreement on that? Should we hum or anything? I think as long as people don't speak against it, we can probably just do it. Yes, yes.
Hey, yeah, so direction of communication seems perfectly reasonable. I think, yeah, that makes sense to move up. The rest of these still seem to me to be something that's a layer on top of taps, right? Like, so it's higher level as opposed to lower level discussion of the properties. Like, so for example, the cost preferences, those are, like the cost preference is generally going to be linked to the PVD or the interface, which you can already specify. So these would be sort of like sub-properties of the interfaces to handle. So I don't really know how to, like, so bringing cost preferences up while you still have properties attached to the interfaces in the main document seems like there's a potential for conflict there that we need to handle. But yeah, definitely move up the direction for communication. I think it was up there, and it might have been Yeah, I would have to take a look at the diffs from the reorg that I did, but it makes sense to have up there. By the way, is my audio okay now, or did I turn my gain down too low?
It's fine. Yeah.
Mia Kulewind, I would like to propose a different strategy to come to a conclusion here, which would be, I would like to see further analysis of these mappings for Quick and DNS and maybe also WebRTC. And if we do those mappings and we don't need any of those features, we don't take them.
Okay, I would agree except for the second. I'll tell you why, but we come to that. Yes?
So, Gori, I would like to shoot at some of them, but if we're doing that, as in eliminate some of these from the list. Do you want me to go through what I don't like? Or do you want to take a different strategy? So,
I mean,
no. Okay, I try.
Yeah, I think it's good to get, what we want to have is input, and we want to have stuff in the minutes, and then your inputs are good, so yeah.
Okay.
Bring them on.
So
We don't need to decide now.
Okay, send or receive bitrate is some sort of capacity request, which to me is linked to the traffic category. So this is a question whether you want to do int-serve detail or int-serve big things like diff-serve type thing. I would suggest don't do bitrates. Define categories that are associated with the sort of bitrates you're wanting, like conversational or something, which means this. But instead of saying a number, because I don't know what to do with a number, and RSVP never did either.
All right.
So that's hitting at bitrate. Duration, I say we don't know. So I say duration's exactly the same. Bulk probably means long. Control thing, I mean, you could have forever. I don't know. So duration's another number. I don't know what to do with it. We had it in RSVP, and it was cool. I don't think it was useful. Size to be sent or received is a promise in the future. So I'm going to end up.
I mean, that's something that I think you may simply know about.
And it's
Yeah, it is a
different-
promise.
It's different
Yeah.
to conversational or query, which presumably have implications on what size you want.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I mean, I would like for Teresa maybe to try and pop in on this.
Yeah, I think Teresa should come if she wants, because I don't want to just shoot. Cost preferences, I'm much more enthusiastic, by the way, about, because I think it's something that the system can really utilize. So I'm not awkward about everything. Right.
So I just, a little time management here that, so we ran long on the earlier sessions.
Right.
So you lost a little bit of time on your session. And so I think that we're going to maybe try, I don't know how many slides you've got, but
A couple, but I mean, it's not a big deal if we cut. I think, we would just want to go ahead with the agreements on things. I think
well, I don't know.
we got
if-
agreement on
judging
that
by
is
the
pretty
length of
good.
the line, I think that we may not get off this slide in the rest
Right,
of the
right,
If
right.
you want to cover all the topics, you may want to
Okay,
circle around and maybe take some
I,
of those.
I don't need to cover all the topics, I think.
Okay,
But-
carry on. I'll just try and make.
Okay. I did, okay.
I'd love to hear if
Yes.
Teresa says something and then a light turns on and then other people agree. But maybe we should just keep it short and give people a chance.
Yeah.
Teresa Enghut, my last understanding was that these intents like size to be sent, duration, bitrate could be a layer on top of tabs and not part of tabs. And like that was my last.
Right.
Yeah.
I would agree with that as well.
I would agree with that as well because it's some higher layer, and a higher layer I don't have a problem.
So the point is we don't have a specific mapping in the implementation what should happen on the wire for that, like not necessarily.
Yeah. You have it as a layer over it.
But also Philip wants to say something to it.
Okay.
Hello. Yeah, we had the discussion about whether we should put this, let's say, more abstract concepts to a separate layer. I'm not sure whether we really need this in the base draft, but as a property, as an add-on. But I think it should be specified at the same namespace. But I think I will come to this. This will become a little bit clearer if we talk about the registry stuff I will present later on. So I really would like to have this discussion after we decided on the format of the property namespace. I think this might help and shorten the discussion.
Okay.
Hi, Colin Perkins. So I think we are used to building congestion control schemes for elastic flows. I think if we start building congestion control schemes for flows which have upper or lower bounds on the acceptable sending rate, we may need to be able to specify send and receive bit rates. For example, if you're sending video and you know that it has a minimum rate, if you can't get at least 1 megabit through, you have to stop because the video won't play. But it can't use more than 4 megabits. Then you may want to specify those bounds so to give hints to the congestion controller for what's needed.
Right.
So that may argue in favor of some way of specifying bit
so
limits.
I remember that. I was actually a little surprised at Gory simply dismissing the send receive bitrate because I think there was some discussion about that previously. So maybe that seems to be a discussion between you two to have. I mean, yeah, maybe you two can just figure this out between yourselves. I think
the comments I made was that some types of congestion, if you're congestion controlling some types of content, you may need to know maximum and minimum bit rates that content either requires or can use to make your congestion control effective.
So Colin, are you saying that this is an ambition to work at a particular bit rate? Are you in that frame of mind?
So if you're sending live video, you may have a video source which, if your congestion controller cannot sustain 1 megabit per second, cannot be used. So you may as well just stop sending. And equally, it may only be able to use a certain upper bound. And so your congestion control may need to know those limits.
This is a different interpretation of bitrate, which is much clearer, much more precise. That I'm happy with that. If it means you get this or you don't get this is a maximum, minimum number, I'm okay. If it's a target bitrate that's kind of, I want to do it at 2 megabits or 2 gigabits, I'm not interested. But for the video codec, yeah. So maybe we need to be very precise if we're doing this about what the semantics are of the transport service. You ask for this, you get that.
Sounds like it's good input. I mean, Miria, you wanted to say something?
Mia Kulun, I do agree on that point actually. And do you know if there's any document in RMCAT that is talking about interface questions? We have something somewhere, right?
Yeah, we certainly used to have such a document. I think it has a bit rotted. I think Zahid may have been the author.
Jaya there. So we had this kind of discussion when it is codec interaction kind of thing, but not in this form, like what bitrate you need, what bitrate maximum or minimum bitrate.
Okay.
Yeah, but we have some discussion, but that discussion is going on the framework document that's currently and RMCAT is not dealing with. And to my personal opinion, it's very hard to actually have a range on some application. It will be depending on like how many recipients are there, how many people flows in the call and all this thing. So I think my personal opinion is a send receive max min thing should be fine here, and you vary in between that one. And basically application, when it doesn't get anything through, it just turn off videos, basically saying like don't send anything. I don't think like TAPSNIP handles that, like stopping the video. I don't think like that should do it. That should never stop sending. Stop sending, like stop sending something. It should be the application decision to make it like whether it's gonna stop a video or keep it. Yeah.
Depends on how you want to build the thing.
So I do see the use case for min and max, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's maybe rather a protocol specific feature you want to put in somewhere.
I don't know.
Maybe what we need is a specific proposal, and then we can.
Yeah.
So actually, that was my original point I wanted to make on traffic class, and I was discussing with Gori earlier on. I'm not happy with class traffic category. That's how it's called, because like this has been an academic exercise forever to try to squeeze in applications into these categories. And Gori said it depends on, that we describe exactly what the implications are of this choice and what we do with it. So I think here the path forward is, so I'm not sure if we need it at all, or if we can rather request more specific information that take input or that are taken as input to a specific mechanism. But I think the way forward is actually to do more work on the implementation document, and then see if we have mechanisms in the implementation document that need these kind of information.
For what it's worth, editor hat off, just my personal opinion, I very much agree with that. I agree that several of these things are, you want to check the implementation first and see if they map onto something real, and then have them. I completely agree with that.
And then the last one on cost preferences. I see that this is something we can use somewhere, but I'm not convinced that this is on the right level here.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we
Gori, I'd like to clarify what I meant
too much.
when I, in previous times I stood up at the IETF about these traffic categories. There should be ways in which the network carries this traffic, not application developers trying to characterize what sort of application they've got. In other words, if you ask for query, that means you're going to send a few packets per second and you want a low interactive delay. If you ask for bulk, then you're going to send many packets and you want maximum throughput. And I think if you do it that way, application developers may be able to choose. If you tell application developers to classify themselves, it's rubbish, and it never worked here.
You keep saying that, and I keep agreeing. So
Yeah, I know, but
I think on that one we really should have converged by now. Actually, yes.
we have already converged, but we haven't got it written, have we?
Right. Okay, let's make that maybe short, because there's at least one other item on the same slide that we didn't discuss and we really want to get to.
I was just qualifying this to say, I mean, we clearly have diff-serve traffic categories of various sorts, which I have certainly never understood. I've never understood which one to use for which application, even if I'm building applications which supposedly match onto those categories. So if we do this, we need to be very clear what the semantics are.
Yeah.
Right.
We are not going to solve that problem in this working group.
Okay. Yes.
So Philip wanted me to repeat at the mic, going under the minimum can raise a soft error.
Oh, okay. All right.
Michael, let me just, I want to do a little bit of time management here. I think this is actually a really good discussion to have as a large group. So we have 3 other topics on the agenda.
Yeah, I have one.
I want to let you get to your other slide. So just let me just sort of work out what I think is the rest of the agenda, just so to give people a chance to scream if they don't like it. Since we didn't have anything specific for implementation reports, I think we should just cut that. Philip says that he can cut his talk down to just 3 to 5 minutes. I think we should give him a chance to do that. The GitHub stuff is actually, the IETF recommendations are very much in flux. And we can either do that on the list or just or defer it to the next meeting, that it doesn't seem like it's that pressing. So I think that this is a good topic to actually have a discussion about. And so I'd like to kind of keep going on this.
Okay.
Are you disagreeing, Miria?
No, I agree, but I think even the registry question is not important.
Yeah.
We can do that one as well, sorry.
Okay, so Philip's willing to go either way. So let's keep going. If you have any time at the end, we'll let Philip talk, and the rest of the stuff we'll just push.
Okay. One item on that list that we haven't yet discussed, but it is on the list, and I think it's important to go through, is should suggest a timeout to the remote endpoint. Now, the reason that exists is we have a dedication to do everything that's in MinSet, and we have pretty much everything from MinSet covered. So the MinSet is this analysis of all these protocols, and the reason we have to suggest a timeout to the remote endpoint is that this is Lars's option. It's the user timeout option that's on, it's Lars's option, the user timeout option in TCP. It's what's a bit awkward is that last time we discussed it, nobody knew if there's any implementation that really does it. Right. So if we want to use it, we have to have it in this. And I mean, it's a selection option, and that you would say, I want to use that, and that would make the system underneath well, it will tell the system underneath that you have a wish to use TCP, essentially. And then you would be able to configure it.
So
that's what we have on the table.
So I would have to check the transport draft again, but I think that there is an equivalent but not identically phrased feature for this in Quick. Is there not? I'm seeing Miria look. The mic's on Miria and she has a look on her face.
Quick experts in the room. Lars.
I don't think so.
Hey, Brian, do you mean the idle timeout? Ooh.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's the idle timeout, correct.
So it's not quite the same.
Okay. Yeah, so this, so.
I told you it's hard.
Yeah.
Wait. Lars, did anybody use the UTO when we did it? Do we need to continue to do it?
It's used now. So Linux implements it, and I think FreeBSD has it too.
Hey, just a minute. You keep doing this to me. I mean, Linux implements the answer. Is it used?
It's in NetDev. It's in the shipping kernels.
Is it enabled by default?
How would I know?
Can we task Lars?
I didn't put that in. Somebody else implemented it, and so I'm guessing they had a reason for it. And given that Linux, rips stuff out that isn't used, I'm guessing it's used, but I don't know.
Okay, so ECN is a
It works perfectly, so nobody sends me email about it.
So Lars, can we task you with actually checking the head kernel and seeing if it's by default in the head kernel?
I think it is, but I can take a look.
A couple minutes.
Assume it is, and if it isn't, I'll come back.
At Tom Jones, as far as I know, it's in FreeBSD and Netflix use it.
Okay.
So given this is not the same feature we have in Quick, I think this is actually a protocol-specific feature.
Protocol specific, I mean, not by the definition of what we have in the document now. It's in Minset, but it's in Minset in the same way like all the other things. So you can use it and fall back. It's not a problem.
Doesn't this depend on the behavior? That
No, I mean, this is what?
It depends on the behavior that you do when you get a timeout. I mean, timeout, what does it mean? Do you terminate the connection? Do you retransmit? Application alert?
Right, it's about having the ability to tell. So I think, as far as I understand, the point of this option is that you may use a larger timeout, but then the other side may close, right? And then you're in trouble if you really want to use a large timeout before terminating the connection, right? So if you need that ability to have a large timeout, you want to negotiate with the other side to tell the other side about this timeout, and that's what that option is. So it's a functional thing, because if you really want to use it, you really need to expose it in the API, and it is offered by TCP, and this is how it ended up being one of the things in Minset that are necessary to keep if you want to use that functionality.
So the fact that there is an implementation of this in TCP, and the fact that there is an implementation of a transport parameter that is in the same space but has different semantics in Quick. And one could say we could add something like this to the UDP options as well, right? Like, so the idle timeout for some endpoint knows that it's behind a NAT that has a certain thing, right? I mean, there is a whole bunch of stuff in this space. This really seems to me like we should implement these as transport-specific parameters for now that we actually talk about in the document.
That is what I got to the mic to say. Why don't we just give it an example of a transport-specific option for TCP to do this?
Can do it like that. I mean, now it's not written like that. We can do that.
It seems to get us out, and it keeps the people who actually need it the possibility of doing it. And
yeah, because in the end, it's only TCP doing it in that form. So,
if I recall correctly, the interface document is silent on how you do transport-specific options. Is it?
So far, yes.
So I think the transport-specific options are specified. They're just, none of them are enumerated. They are left currently as an exercise to
Right,
read.
right.
So I think it
Can
would
move
be
it
a
there.
good one to enumerate in there as one of the standard ones.
We can make that one the first. Okay. Sounds like a plan. Cool. I get to my next slide. All right.
Hey, go back.
Okay, I go back. Okay.
Lysek, since you alerted me that you guys are discussing this, so this is actually a standards track extension, not experimental.
Yeah, no, I didn't say it was experimental.
You say Appendix A experimental transport.
Oh, no. This was not a reference to the state of the RFC. This is where they're now listed as things that, we considered as an experiment. This is exactly why we're discussing that they maybe shouldn't be there in that list. Okay. A couple of other issues that we had in the GitHub. Right. I hope this is an easy one. So there was a restructuring. I don't know how many of you folks have looked at that restructuring or care about it. I think Brian has done a fantastic job at updating some things, and Philip has done quite an effort. Like, there were a lot of people, mangling that document quite a bit. There was once this classification as something being a selection property or configuration property or whatever it was called. And that was a useful exercise, but now it's implicit in the document structure just by moving it to the right place, which was quite nice. I think was also a suggestion from Miri at some point. The question is there anybody having an issue with the current structure? Is it all fine and dandy? Are we happy with it? I hope. I like the structure. Cool. Next is 243. Several of us believe that we should suggest option, action, and event names, also property names. We should have a proper, the right way to phrase these names. Right now, there are basically sentences like like you've seen, right? Suggest a timeout to the remote endpoint is not really a name of a property. And so there's a question on what these names should look like. I said see also registry discussion because I thought it would happen, but anyway, on these slides there were also some things about should it be camel case, should it be whatnot. Any opinions?
Mike Bishop, that sounds very much like an editorial decision.
Yes, well, okay. Right? We can make that easy. We can go ahead and do it like that. It's fine.
So I agree we should have names for them.
Yeah.
I don't care whether they're camel case or whatever.
Even as an editor, I don't care, but I can just go ahead and do stuff. It's fine. I think Brian tends to care about names, so he can do that.
I can say that I hate camels if you like.
So Brian is actually on.
Yeah, I can take the action item to do this, right? I will suggest some things that are designed to annoy people so that we'll at least get some, people who claim to have no opinions will be called out. So yeah, but we can sit down and do this relatively quickly, I think.
Yeah. I'm cool with that.
Sheddable topics.
Good.
Somebody.
Hey. So towards this question, just take a look at the slides for the registry discussion, because most of the slides are exactly targeting this question. We could also discuss this offline and make a joint proposal if you like.
So let's cut things here. I think this is a good place to stop. And can I just see a quick show of hands of folks who are willing to be available for an interim before the end of the year, so we can try to do something in the next few weeks. Are you going to raise your hands?
A virtual intern.
Okay, your virtual hand. Yeah, virtual intern.
Virtual hand.
Yeah, online. I thought we've done pretty well with those. Okay. Let me ask. Okay, Brian's raising his hand. That was my questions, whether he was going to be offline for an extended period. Okay, so let's just plan to do that. We can revisit this list. We'll do Philip's talk on registries. We should talk a little bit about GitHub and trying to adopt the IETF best practices, and maybe we'll even have some feedback on the security document to talk about. So let's cut things here. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you online and then in Prague.
Okay.
Thank you then.
Oh, blue sheets. Did everybody send the blue sheets? Did they even go around?
Yeah, I had to send them out.
I was distracted with that.
Is it painful?
No, it's not painful, but it's like I'm completely deaf in one ear. So when you say anything to me, it's like I can't hear a word you say. I can hear everything that they're saying because this year's.
Oh, it's kind of like
Yeah, I was sending an email.